Hi, I'm Al Baldessaro,
And I'm Janine Nodder.
and this is Who's Looking Out for You.
Hi.
Janine, we got a special guest today who's probably going to be our next congressman.
Yes, our past and future Congressman, Frank Guinta.
You know, Frank is, I'm glad he stepped back up because, for the last couple of years, I've seen Carol Shea Porter once, and I had to drive all the way to Portsmouth to an event that I wasn't invited to, but I showed up. It was a veterans event.
Good for you.
So I'm hoping that we start getting town meetings back and everything else so we know what's going on in Washington. Frank, we need you back, buddy. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The applause are all for you.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Frank, I was going over, looking at some of the bills in Washington, D.C., and what I'm kind of disgusted on, when you were a congressman, you passed a lot of bills. Why didn't the Senate take up these good bills there for jobs bills?
Yeah, back in the 112th Congress, the House of Representatives, if you recall, passed a timely budget, passed over 40 jobs-related bills, many of which were passed bipartisanly, some with smaller numbers of Democrats, some with larger numbers of Democrats, but nonetheless bipartisanly that we would send to the Senate in hoping to try to revive and focus on economic issues and economic growth. And the frustration that I think I and many of my colleagues had was that Harry Reid would choose not to take these bills up, which in my view is just not fair to the American people. They're looking for leadership, they're looking for things to get accomplished, and there were a lot of areas where there could be and has been bipartisan agreement, particularly when it comes to the economy, jobs, and the middle class. Mm-hmm. So I think as you approach the election cycle in 2014, I think that issue will be considered in some of these more competitive United States Senate races, where you may see a flip from a Democrat seat to a Republican seat. But then the expectation and the responsibility would be on this next Congress to get things done, to put things on the president's desk, and work with the president to try to move the country forward. And I think that's on probably the most important issue, is that things actually get accomplished. It's what I hear the most when I talk to people around New Hampshire. They want something to get done to improve this economy.
My question for you. Okay, jobs and economy, Obamacare, or illegal immigration. What is the #1 issue?
Well, I think long-term it's always jobs and economy, but then there are specific periods of time during the campaign where different issues rise to the top. Immigration has been an important issue of late. We have seen what happened on the Texas border. A lot of people across party lines are frustrated, including members of Congress who are Democrat members of Congress who are frustrated with the president and his inaction just as much as Republicans are. So that over the summer has sort of risen to a top tier issue because it's in the moment. The Affordable Care Act I think has always been an important issue. As you hit October 1st, when the new rates come out, you will see people once again publicly frustrated because the expectation is that those rates are going to dramatically increase by all objective measurements that we've seen. And that's going to be a problem for small businesses and for families who have to make insurance decisions in October for next year, right before an election.
I question it, and I mentioned in the beginning about town meetings, our congressman coming back. I know when you were a congressman, you hosted probably 20 to 30 town meetings throughout the state. Will you continue to do that? Will Frank Guinta continue to be transparent and come out to the public and tell what's going on?
Yes, I started town hall meetings when I was a mayor. We called them ward by ward meetings back then because the city of Manchester is dissected by ward. But they were effectively town hall meetings. I thought it was an important obligation of constituent service to listen to your constituents, give them the opportunity to give their perspective and point of view, and so you could best reflect and represent what their issues are. As a member of Congress, I did the same thing. We held more than 20 town hall meetings and forums throughout the state. I think it's an important obligation when you serve. When Carol Shea Porter first won in 2006, she started her campaign at a town hall meeting of then Congressman Jeb Bradley and really kind of kicked off her campaign through the passionate issue of the war at that point in '06.
Right.
And she was very focused on town hall meetings. Fast forward to today, she's a very different kind of member of Congress. She has not held, in my view, one town hall meeting. She would argue this year she's held one, but it was essentially invite only. And people who did not give advance notice were not allowed in.
Right.
That's
Right,
not a
that's
town
the one
hall
you
meeting.
crashed,
Right, that's the
Okay.
one I want, yes.
that's not
They
a
wouldn't even
town
let
hall
anyone
meeting by New
videotape.
Hampshire.
Some veterans wanted to videotape, and Carol Shea Porter's people said, no, you can't videotape. Now, I turned around and I look at the back, I see her people videotaping Carol Shea Porter. I said, oh, you don't want anyone using this for political reason, why are you doing it? Oh, it's for our own internal
Right.
use.
So it's to,
that
it's
was
to
wrong.
make it look like she has a lot of support.
Right.
That's why it's invitation only, so that there's no one there who disagrees with her.
Yeah, look, the notion of a town hall meeting is to allow anyone of any political party,
Right.
any political perspective, to come and meet with their member of Congress. And I've had my share of town hall meetings where there are people who oppose the things that I've done or disagree with the policy decisions that I've made on all sorts of spectrums, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. The key, I believe, is to allow people the opportunity to talk with their member of Congress, number one. Number two, you can learn something
Right.
from, what you don't have to be as rigid in your policy to never listen to what someone has to say. And I invite that process, and that is the New Hampshire tradition.
Well,
And I'm
glad to see
disappointed that
that
Carol Shea Porter's
I'm-
not doing that now, and it's something that I will continue, should I be fortunate enough to serve.
Frank, I don't know if you're aware, you may be, Janine and I are both with the House Republican Alliance.
Yes.
Which is the HRA. I'm one of the tri-chairs. We focus on the Constitution. Is it constitutional? I remember you had a thing where you were putting out where you had to put a constitutional statement on a bill.
Correct.
Will you continue that there to make sure that the bills in Washington are constitutional and they're not making laws that go against our Constitution?
In the 112th Congress, when I came in as a freshman, part of the House rules that we adopted were any piece of legislation that we file, Republican or Democrat, has to ensure that it meets the obligations of the United States Constitution. And I think that's a good rule. And that rule, I think, came out of the concerns expressed in the previous Congress, where bills were coming to the floor. They weren't being read by members of Congress. It frustrated Americans all throughout the country. So that practice continues, and I will continue that practice should I be elected. I think it's critical to let people know that the Constitution is the guiding principle. Now, there are different interpretations of the Constitution all the time, but I'd rather have the policy debate on whether a piece of legislation is constitutional rather than the partisan debate, which so often happens on the floor of the House, which I don't think should. These debates should be policy-based and focusing on the nature of what is in the best interest of constituents here in New Hampshire and across the country.
Speaking of the Constitution, we might even say, frankly speaking, when you were elected the first time, you guys read, the Congress read the Constitution. Was that
That was
a first-time
awesome.
event?
To my knowledge, it was the first time that members of Congress read the Constitution on the floor. And believe it or not, there was some pushback from some members, which didn't really make sense to me. I think when you start out in a new Congress, after you're sworn in, it's important to remind members and the country that we have certain guiding principles. We can have different ideological beliefs and different viewpoints of the importance or how the Constitution is interpreted, but reading the Constitution on the floor, I thought sent a message that we take it seriously, that we're going to adhere to it. And I was fortunate enough to read the Second Amendment.
I thought so. I
And
remember
it was
correctly.
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you the story. Members were lining up on both sides of the aisle, and it would go, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. And people were trying to figure out which line that they would get to read, and there was a lot of interest in reading the Second Amendment. And here I am, a freshman, and
From New Hampshire.
sitting amongst
That's right.
a group of more veteran legislators. And my turn came up right after Gabby Giffords, and it happened to be the Second Amendment. And I went, read the Second Amendment. I came back, and all these more veteran members of Congress are sitting there, and they're like, "How did you get the Second Amendment?" I said, "Listen, It's live free or die in New Hampshire.
That's right.
Don't mess with New Hampshire.
I remember
And they all got a kick out of it.
mentioning Gabby Giffords
Yeah.
when you were first elected, but I didn't remember the details of that.
She had read she read immediately before me. That's actually how I met Gabby Giffords.
You know, we have a candidate, I mean, not a candidate, but we have a guy that lives in town, Gene Shannon, who's pretty big on the Constitution. He's trying to get the Constitution
Did we have him
in
on the
all the
show?
schools.
Yeah, we
Yes,
had him
did
on
a
the
show
show,
with him.
yeah.
But anyways, what I learned yesterday, we went to the school, Peter Kerr, he works for the school here in Londonderry on our district office. What I learned yesterday wasn't aware. In 2004, Public Law 108-447, Section 11 was passed requiring the following. Each educational institute that receives federal funds for a fiscal year shall hold an educational program on the United States Constitution on September 17th, Constitutional Day. I never knew that until he educated me yesterday. And when kids come up to the State House, I ask them about the Constitution. They know about the U.S. Very few know about New Hampshire
the New Hampshire
Constitution.
Constitution, yeah.
And I'm glad you're one representative there that took this to Washington with you and didn't forget where you came from.
Well, when I was mayor of the city, we had what's called a charter. Every community has a city or a town charter. And for us, it was called the Red Book because it was a red book.
Right.
And I would bring
Because
the
it was
book.
red.
So I would bring the Red Book,
Right.
which was our charter, to every Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting. And before long, every alderman had their Red Book and was referencing their Red Book.
Good.
Nice.
When issues came up of whether we were following the charter or not. And I did that for a purpose because regardless of how you feel about a policy decision, you first have to make sure that you were being following the charter or following your state or federal constitution. It should be a cool thing, for lack of a better term, that you are referencing your charter or your constitution. And I hope that that becomes the guiding principle for every elected official. I mean, think about it. It's why we run for office in the first place. We
Right.
care about our community, our state, or our country. And I think it sends a good, strong message that if you're going to start with the charter, start with the Constitution, that you can have a debate based on policy and based on substance rather than the rhetoric that you tend to hear, which is really what frustrates people with their government.
Let's talk a few minutes about your time as mayor. You brought back the marathon. Thank you, by the way. And you helped us get the Gold Star Mother statue in front of the Radisson Hotel.
Well, the Gold Star Mother statue was a great effort by a lot of people. I was very appreciative that Manchester was chosen as the location for it, and I wanted to make sure that we did everything we could to welcome the statue and honor Gold Star mothers. So I very often visit that statue on a regular basis. It's right downtown Manchester in front of the Radisson on Elm Street, across from Veterans Park. It's just a nice reminder to all of us of the sacrifices that have been given for our freedom. In terms of the marathon, the marathon we hadn't had for 50 years. So my team and I were in my office one day talking about what are the things that we can do to try to improve the community. And a young lady by then, the name of Sarah Hewitt, who is now Sarah Norman, said, why don't we have she was a runner, and she said, why don't we have a marathon? And I looked at her and I said, yeah, I think that would be a great idea. And I'll never forget, she put a great presentation together. We had a sports council at the time that we made a presentation to. And then I just kind of thought to myself, wait a minute, we can do this. I mean, we wanted to try to gather support for it. But here I am, the mayor of the city, and so we talked with other officials and we said, we're doing this marathon. And the other side of it that is important to me personally is the recipient of the dollars is the Greater Manchester Mental Health Center. I am greatly concerned about mental health issues. I've got a family member who's got a mental illness. I want to promote positive awareness around a positive event, and we've raised over $100,000 for the Mental Health Center. And this is an important time for mental health in the state of New Hampshire. You're both aware of the challenges that we're going through on a state level with funding, how to get bed space, reasonable resources to those who are mentally ill. And what I try to remind people is no one who's mentally ill ever asks for it.
That's right.
And there's still a stigmatism attached to mental illness, and there shouldn't be. you know, no one, I ask people to remind themselves, if you come across someone who's mentally ill, they didn't want to be mentally ill. They don't enjoy being mentally ill, and they want to get better just as much as anyone else with a physical. Yeah, they need the assistance, and I think it's our obligation. And there are ways that we can do it in an effective and efficient manner that can streamline the process, help more people quicker in the process, and it'll alleviate some of the safety issues that we're having in our emergency rooms throughout the state of New Hampshire in our state's hospitals.
Well, one way we can help is by promoting and supporting the marathon. So I've run either the half marathon or the whole marathon since it first started.
That's great.
So I think I might have missed 1 year because I was injured. But I remember after the gun went off that first marathon, I saw you. You saw me too. It was like in that crowd. Our eyes just met. And I went, "Hey, Mayor!" Like that's your name.
Right.
Hey,
And
did you know that the Democrat newspaper, the Fosters, I think it's called, the Fosters
yes,
Daily Democrat,
they endorsed Frank Guinta.
Well, they're not a Democrat paper.
They're just called.
They're called
the Democrat, right? But
yeah,
they're
Foster's
more,
Daily Democrat.
But they focus more to the left.
Don't all papers?
Well, yeah, but I'm saying a lot of their writing.
Most TV shows?
How did you get that endorsement there in her area over Cal Shea Porter?
Well, I think it's about hard work. It's about giving the perspective of reasonableness and being rational and trying to take issues head on. And that's important to people. You know, again, we may not always agree on a particular issue, but I think the tone and tenor and how you try to address an issue is important. Number one. Number two, you know, I was able as a freshman to get 3 bills signed into law. Most people don't realize that. And in the minority party down in Washington, one was a veterans bill and 2 were transportation related. But the one that was important to veterans was Clark Cemetery in the Philippines was not being cared for by the United States government. Yet we had, yeah, we worked together on that piece of legislation. I filed the House legislation, she worked on the Senate legislation. We got it signed into law by this president. That's important because the dignity of where veterans are interned.
I've been to Clark, I've been there.
Have you?
Yes, I have. It's a shame. And I'm glad you finally got that straightened out where they're preserving, protecting that cemetery there.
But that's an example of bipartisanship that can work. There were 2 other bills, transportation related. I was on the transportation committee that I worked hard with Republicans and Democrats to get accomplished. Those are the things, if we can remind people that there are leaders who are willing to work on issues of substance and importance with members of the other side of the aisle. Those are the kinds of leaders that you want elected because then we can solve the problems that our nation faces. And most people are concerned about the long-term debt, our current deficit, the lack of opportunity for a good, strong job, the challenges that the middle class faces, the cost of education. These are all things that people want to get solved. But in my view, the way to solve them is recognize that there's only so many dollars to go around and we have to spend those dollars frugally and effectively and efficiently. We've got to reduce our deficit and have a balanced budget, something that I support, a balanced budget amendment. I don't know who wouldn't, quite frankly. And then on the other side, we need long-term tax reform, both on the individual side and the corporate side, so you have a better opportunity for certainty for economic growth. And the third component really is the regulatory concerns right now for businesses. I don't know if you saw this most recent issue of some companies acquiring another company that's from another country, and that becomes the ownership of the American company, thereby allowing that American company not to pay taxes in America. Companies are doing this because the tax requirements of 35% are too high and the regulatory compliance is too high. And the latest is Burger King. They are going to acquire Hortons, which is a Canadian company. They're then going to be headquartered in Canada. Well, guess who is putting the deal together? The individual, now I'm forgetting his name, Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett,
who's a big supporter of the president.
Obama, the president,
right?
Yeah.
And
connections.
so when Warren Buffett is advocating for a policy that the president says is unpatriotic, you know that you need tax reform in this country.
You ain't
Yeah,
kidding.
absolutely. Well, Frank, just the fact that you were able to get 3 bills passed as a freshman in the minority proves that you have the gift of diplomacy and that you can work across the aisle to get the job done. So you have my vote, just
Well,
so
thank
you
you.
know.
Without a doubt, you know, there was another question I had for you. You were a co-sponsor of the Spending Control Act,
Yes.
which I thought was an outstanding bill that was a win-win for New Hampshire and many other states. Did that ever go through, and whatever happened with that? Or,
Well, so we started with the cut, cap, and balance bill, which was cutting spending, capping spending over the next 10 years, which gave the, if passed, would have been the 10-year blueprint for spending levels in the country, and then requiring a balanced budget amendment vote for the Constitution, which I think is critically important if you want to actually balance the budget. Most members of Congress say they want to balance the budget, but they're not willing to make the hard, difficult choices to do so. What we ended up with was the Budget Control Act, which essentially cut spending and capped spending for the next 10 years. We did take the balanced budget amendment vote. I voted in favor of it, but again, that was not coming up in the Senate. So this is the challenge.
So it did pass the House then?
It did pass the
Okay,
House.
awesome. Are you going to bring it back up?
Yes, yes, I will. I think it's an important component to having a balanced budget. When I was mayor, all 4 years I proposed tax hikes, balanced budgets through the course of the year, no matter what happened. I was able to manage the budget to ensure that we were spending less than what was appropriated. And it wasn't just Republicans who liked that. You know, Manchester is a hard hat Democrat city. Democrats liked the fact that I was being careful with taxpayer dollars and then trying to make those dollars as effective and efficient as you possibly can. Washington needs to do and act the same way.
That's right.
The problem is they're borrowing so much money, they're getting us into further and further debt. We still have the greatest amount of borrowing from China, which puts us at a disadvantage, I believe. So let's balance our budget. Let's start reducing the debt. Let's have tax policy reform so you can grow the economy. And people all around this country, including here in New Hampshire, have access to good quality paying jobs. And if you have that recipe and we can get that accomplished, you will see the country in far better shape 2 and 4 years from now than it is today.
Do you have anything in your notes about the Unaffordable Care Act?
Oh, I always have things on that, you know. But before I get into that, I know, you know, there was something there. I know you and I vote all the time, especially the last 2 years, on many taxes and fees. And one
We
of the
voted
first
against
things
the
I
taxes
think
and
of
fees.
is this going to take food off the table of hardworking people, and is this going to take away their quality of life? And I'm sure you were a state rep as a Congress. What goes through your mind when they're putting forward these taxes and spending?
Yeah, the experience I bring as a former business owner, as a state legislator, as a city alderman, as a mayor and a former congressman, I take a lot of things into consideration on every piece of legislation. But number one, you want to know what the direct impact to communities are going to be to individuals.
And go right into Affordable Care Act.
I will.
I
will.
It's unaffordable.
Unaffordable,
You
right.
want to know what the economic impact is, whether it's a piece of legislation or a regulation, so you can have the ability to have an informed decision. And I think as a legislator, you have that obligation and responsibility, and the experience I have helps me make those decisions. But you also always want to take into account what your constituents ask for, which is why the importance of town hall meetings. The Affordable Care Act is now 4 years old. When it was passed into law, remember Nancy Pelosi saying, we've got to pass it to know what's in it.
Yes.
We were promised by this president, by Congresswoman Shea Porter specifically, that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. We were promised that this was going to reduce cost and allow us more options. Well, here's the reality of what's happened now, 4 years later. In New Hampshire, you had 22,000 people lose their insurance. Secondly, you have an exchange put in by one carrier that excluded 10 hospitals. So in Portsmouth, you have no access. In Rochester, you have no access to Frisbee. 7,000 people in the city of Rochester who were being treated by Frisbee.
Isn't St. Joseph's too in Nashua?
I have to check on that.
I think so.
You might be right. I have to check. I know that that's in the 2nd Congressional District, but there are many in the 2nd Congressional District that were eliminated as well. But in Rochester, where it's Carol Shea Porter's hometown, you've got 7,000 people who were being provided care by Frisbee at the cost of Frisbee. And because the Affordable Care Act network in New Hampshire excluded Frisbee Hospital, those 7,000 people have nowhere to go.
That's right.
That to me is not greater access. And not only did they lose their hospital, but the one component that people don't talk about is that we lost 1,000 doctors in the state of New Hampshire. And by the way, this is a cost to taxpayers to the tune of $2 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And that's something that's not talked about anymore. So we've gone further into debt for a policy that, by most objective measurements, is not supported by the people of New Hampshire. Carol Shea Porter continues to double down and support it. What I would like to see is a more free market approach where you remove that community rating bill that then Governor Shaheen put into place, so we can bring more options in terms of insurance carriers here to New Hampshire. Number one. Number two, I'd love to erase the state lines, even if we could just do it for our region, so no matter where the hospital, where the insurance carrier is, whether it's in Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, you could access services, policies from those carriers. That would give you all of a sudden immediate options that would reduce the cost. And by the way, I've talked to Anthem, I've talked to the head of Anthem in New Hampshire about it, who, Lisa Gurdon, who said, yeah, we welcome more competition in the state. We want to see more competition in the state. And then you've got to deal with some other longer term issues that I think are bipartisan and can be bipartisan, but portability is critical. If you work in Massachusetts and live in Massachusetts and you decide you want to come to New Hampshire, or from any state in the country for that matter, you should be able to, everything is portable except your health insurance. That shouldn't be the case. You should be able to buy health insurance just like you buy auto insurance or homeowners insurance or renters insurance. You should be able to pick from a host of carriers. That is just not the case. That would drive down cost.
Absolutely, competition.
Well,
competition does drive cost,
here
but also quality of care is critical. And this is such a personal decision. You know, my mother was diagnosed years ago with breast cancer. It was a very scary moment for my mom and for our family. And I never could imagine her going through the challenge of the decisions of breast cancer.
Washington, D.C. making the decision.
If Washington, D.C. was part of that decision. Now, thankfully, she's been cancer-free for years.
Thank you.
Awesome.
She fights, as our family does, for breast cancer awareness. But I want my mom, our family, and her physician to be making that decision, not bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Yep. Frank, how do, we got about 15 seconds. Well, we'll be closing up. But anyways, how do anyone get in touch and want to help Frank Guinta get elected?
Well, please go to our website, teamguinta.com, if you want to volunteer or contribute to the effort. Our campaign office is on 1850 Elm Street in Manchester, right downtown on the corner of Webster and Elm. We've got 2 weeks of the primary, September 9. I encourage people to vote for myself and to help us get our message out. But our grassroots campaign is very effective. We have volunteers on the phones and canvassing, as I do the same thing all throughout the district. It's important. We need help there. So.
Oh, I need a yard sign. I left a spot in my yard for you.
We'll get you one.
And Janine, Merrimack State Representative, one of their finest. How do they get in touch with you? They have questions?
Actually, the state website's the best.
State
I use
website?
that email address.
Okay. And I'm Al Baldessaro, and you can reach me at albaldessaro.com or 425-6997. And once again, a great show, Frank. It was on to have you here in Londonderry.
Good to see you.
And Janine, once again, another great guest.
Well,
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.